What if I told you that the most dangerous hacker in American history wasn't hiding in a basement in Russia or operating from a secret facility in China? He was sitting in a government office, collecting a paycheck from the FBI, teaching cybersecurity seminars to college students, and at night stealing hundreds of millions of credit card numbers from the world's biggest companies. This is the story of Albert Gonzalez, a man who lived two completely different lives simultaneously for nearly a decade. A man who helped the government catch hackers while being the most wanted hacker on the planet. And the most insane part? Nobody saw it coming. Today, we're going deep into one of the most extraordinary criminal stories in the history of the internet. From a 14-year-old kid hacking NASA from his bedroom to running a global cybercrime empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, this story has everything: genius, betrayal, greed, and one of the greatest double crosses in law enforcement history. Stay with me, because this one is unlike anything you've heard before. The story starts in 1981 in Havana, Cuba. Albert Gonzalez was born into a working-class Cuban family. Life in Cuba was difficult, and like many families of that era, his parents dreamed of something better. When Albert was around 12 years old, the family made the decision to emigrate to the United States, eventually settling in Miami, Florida. Miami in the early 1990s was a city full of energy, music, culture, opportunity. For most kids Albert's age, life was about making friends, playing sports, fitting in at a new school in a new country. But Albert was different from the start. The moment he encountered a computer, something shifted inside him. This wasn't curiosity, this was obsession. While his classmates were outside playing, Albert was inside, staring at a screen, trying to figure out how everything worked. Not just how to use computers, but how they worked at the deepest level. How networks communicated, how systems were built, and most importantly, where the cracks were. He started buying books on programming. He taught himself how to write code. He spent his nights reading everything he could find about network security, system architecture, and hacking techniques. He joined early internet forums where hackers exchanged knowledge, dark corners of the early web where the most technically advanced minds gathered to share what they knew. On these forums, Albert went by the username Soup Nazi, a reference to a character from the popular TV show Seinfeld. It was a playful name for someone who was developing anything but playful skills. By the time Albert was 14 years old, he wasn't just reading about hacking, he was doing it. In 1995, a 14-year-old boy sitting in his bedroom in Miami successfully broke into a computer system belonging to NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, one of the most protected government agencies in the United States. Now, to be clear, the breach was relatively limited. He accessed an IT department system, not classified mission data, and he was still learning, so his intrusion wasn't particularly sophisticated by later standards. But the fact that a 14-year-old kid managed to get inside a NASA network at all was deeply alarming to the authorities. What made it worse was that Albert didn't cover his tracks properly. He was still learning. The intrusion triggered internal alarms almost immediately. Within hours, the FBI was tracing the breach back to its origin. When investigators identified the source, they expected to find a foreign intelligence operation, a state-sponsored attack, a sophisticated criminal group.
Instead, they found a teenager. Agents showed up at Albert's school the next morning. When they walked in, Albert, who had been laughing about the whole thing privately, immediately broke down crying. He performed panic perfectly, and the agents, perhaps not fully believing that this kid was actually capable of what the evidence suggested, chose to issue a warning rather than pursue charges. They told him to stay away from computers. They left. Albert stopped crying the moment they walked out the door. He had just learned something critical. The authorities underestimated him, and that was the most powerful tool he would ever have.
Instead of stepping back from hacking after the NASA incident, Albert accelerated. He became a regular on IRC, Internet Relay Chat. For those unfamiliar, IRC in the late 1990s was essentially the dark web social network before the dark web existed. It was a series of chat channels where hackers, programmers, and cybercriminals from around the world connected, shared techniques, and collaborated on projects. Albert was a standout even in that world. He absorbed information faster than almost anyone around him. He wasn't just learning theory, he was applying everything immediately, testing, experimenting, refining his methods. He graduated high school and enrolled in Miami-Dade College, but university held almost no interest for him. His real education was happening online every night in conversations with some of the most technically skilled hackers on the planet. He briefly tried to go legitimate. He moved to New York, got a job at a tech company, then at Siemens. But corporate life was completely wrong for him. He had spent years operating with total freedom, setting his own hours, following his own rules, doing work that genuinely challenged him. Sitting in an office, answering to a manager who felt threatened by him, grinding through bureaucracy, it was suffocating. After less than a year in the corporate world, Albert quit. He went back to what he knew, but this time he wasn't playing small. By the early 2000s, Albert had connected with one of the most significant criminal networks in the early history of cybercrime, Shadowcrew. Shadowcrew was a dark web marketplace, a platform where hackers, identity thieves, and financial criminals gathered to buy and sell stolen data. Credit card numbers, social security numbers, bank account credentials, entire databases stolen from corporations. Think of it as a black market eBay for cybercrime, and it was enormous. At its peak, Shadowcrew had thousands of members across dozens of countries. When Albert joined, he wasn't an unknown. The hacker community had long memories. His reputation from the NASA breach, even though it happened when he was 14, had followed him. He was known, he was respected. Within a short period, Albert rose to become one of the most senior figures on the platform. He was managing operations, facilitating transactions, and building his criminal resume at the same time as he was building genuine expertise in network security and exploitation. But here's what Albert didn't know. Since the NASA incident, he had never fully left the radar of law enforcement. The FBI had been watching, not closely, but consistently, tracking his online presence, building a file, waiting for the right moment. That moment came in 2003. A plainclothes NYPD detective working in collaboration with the Secret Service on cybercrime investigations had been monitoring Shadowcrew activity. The trail eventually led to Albert, not as a minor player, but as one of the key organizers on the platform. In 2003, agents caught Albert using a counterfeit ATM card to withdraw cash. It was a relatively minor offense on the surface, but when they brought him in and started talking, they quickly realized they had something much bigger than a credit card fraudster. They had a key to the entire Shadowcrew network, and so they made him an offer. The offer was simple, and it was the kind of offer that completely changed the trajectory of Albert Gonzalez's life in more ways than one. The government said, "We won't prosecute you, you won't go to prison, but in exchange, you work for us." Specifically, Albert was recruited to work with the Secret Service on Operation Firewall, a major undercover investigation targeting Shadowcrew and other cybercriminal networks. His role would be to act as an informant inside the criminal world, to feed the government intelligence, to help them identify and arrest key players. Albert agreed. Now, on the surface, this looked like a straightforward case of a criminal turning informant to avoid prison time, and to the government, that's exactly what it looked like. But Albert had a completely different calculation running in his head. Yes, he wanted to avoid prison, but more than that, he saw working with the Secret Service as the most valuable educational opportunity he had ever encountered. By being embedded inside a federal cybercrime investigation, he would gain access to information that no hacker in the world had. How law enforcement traced cybercriminals, what tools they used, what evidence they looked for, where the blind spots in their investigations were, how corporate security systems were analyzed from the government's perspective. He was essentially enrolling in the world's most advanced course in cybersecurity, paid for by the US government, while simultaneously being one of the most active cybercriminals in the country. He began providing the government with real intelligence. He helped them arrest Shadowcrew members. Operation Firewall eventually resulted in the takedown of the platform and the arrest of dozens of members across multiple countries. Albert received commendations, his handlers trusted him, his reputation inside the Secret Service grew, all while he was planning the biggest theft in internet history.
With his government connections giving him cover, his skills sharper than ever, and his understanding of law enforcement techniques giving him a clear map of what to avoid, Albert began building his next operation. The technique was called Wardriving. The concept is straightforward. A team gets into a van or car equipped with high-powered laptops and long-range wireless antennas. They drive to the parking lots of large retail companies and shopping centers. They scan for wireless networks. When they find one, they analyze it for vulnerabilities. And if the network has weaknesses, which in the mid-2000s most corporate networks did, they exploit those weaknesses to gain access. Albert assembled a small, trusted team. His old friend Stephen Watt, who he had known from his IRC days, and Christopher Scott, another skilled hacker he had connected with online. Together, they began targeting large American retailers, and they quickly found that the security protecting these networks was far weaker than anyone publicly acknowledged. Companies with billions of dollars in revenue were running wireless networks with outdated encryption. Their systems were full of vulnerabilities that had been known about for years but never patched. Albert's team would park outside a store. Within minutes, they would be inside the network. They planted malicious software designed to capture payment card data. Every credit card and debit card number processed at checkout would be intercepted and stored, then transmitted back to Albert's servers. This was patient, methodical, professional-level criminal work. And it worked.
As the war-driving operation produced results, Albert was simultaneously developing a more powerful approach. He had been studying a technique called SQL injection,
a method of attacking database systems by exploiting vulnerabilities in how websites communicate with their underlying databases. If done correctly, SQL injection could give an attacker direct access to a company's entire database, all customer records, all payment information, all stored credentials. What made this particularly devastating was scale. Many large retailers used similar database systems. If you could compromise one system and understand its architecture, you could often apply the same techniques to dozens of other companies using the same platform. Albert connected with a Ukrainian hacker named Maxim Yastremski, known in criminal circles as Maxik, who became one of the primary channels for selling the stolen card data on international black markets. Through Maxik's network, Albert's stolen data was being sold to criminals across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The operation had gone global. By 2006 and 2007, Albert and his team had compromised the systems of some of the largest retail companies in the United States and internationally, including TJX companies, OfficeMax, Barnes & Noble, and several others. The total number of payment card records stolen, approximately 170 million. 170 million. The financial damages to banks, card networks, and consumers ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars. What makes Albert's story truly extraordinary isn't just the scale of the theft. It's how he managed to do it while simultaneously working for the government. During the day, Albert Gonzalez was a Secret Service asset. He attended briefings, he provided intelligence, he helped agents understand how cybercriminals operated. He gave presentations at universities and high schools about cybersecurity and online safety, speaking as an expert who had turned his skills toward protecting people. His handlers genuinely respected him. They saw him as a reformed criminal who had chosen to do the right thing. His income from the government was legitimate and documented. His lifestyle, while comfortable, was explained by his consulting work. The millions he was making from stolen credit cards were kept entirely separate, held in cash, hidden in properties, moved through systems specifically designed to avoid detection. He was meticulous. Every expense had a legitimate explanation. Every financial record was clean. What makes Albert's story truly extraordinary isn't just the scale of the theft. It's how he managed to do it while simultaneously working for the government. During the day, Albert Gonzalez was a Secret Service asset. He attended briefings, he provided intelligence, he helped agents understand how cybercriminals operated. He gave presentations at universities and high schools about cybersecurity and online safety, speaking as an expert who had turned his skills toward protecting people. His handlers genuinely respected him. They saw him as a reformed criminal who had chosen to do the right thing. His income from the government was legitimate and documented. His lifestyle, while comfortable, was explained by his consulting work. The millions he was making from stolen credit cards were kept entirely separate, held in cash, hidden in properties, moved through systems specifically designed to avoid detection. He was meticulous. Every expense had a legitimate explanation. Every financial record was clean. For years, nobody connected the dots. The end came from a direction Albert never fully anticipated. In late 2007, Turkish authorities arrested Maxim Yastremski. When investigators examined his computers and accounts, they found something significant: records of communications with an anonymous American contact who had been providing him with massive quantities of stolen card data. The Americans were brought in. They worked with Turkish authorities to decrypt portions of Yastremski's data. And as the investigation deepened, they began to profile this anonymous contact. Yastremski, facing serious prison time, made the same calculation Albert had made years earlier. He cooperated. The information he provided was specific enough to build a profile, and eventually, that profile pointed towards someone who should have been the last person on the list: a Secret Service informant named Albert Gonzalez. In May 2008, federal agents arrested Albert at a luxury hotel in Miami. They found 2 laptops, loaded firearms, and $25,000 in cash. More importantly, they found encrypted files containing evidence of years of systematic criminal activity. When confronted with the evidence, Albert initially tried to maintain his cover. But as his associates were arrested one by one, including Stephen Watt and Christopher Scott, both of whom eventually cooperated with prosecutors, the full picture emerged. Albert's lawyer presented a medical report arguing that he suffered from internet addiction, that his compulsive relationship with technology had driven his criminal behavior. The court considered this as a mitigating factor. It wasn't enough. In 2010, Albert Gonzalez was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever handed down for computer crime in U.S. history at that point. He was also ordered to forfeit all assets acquired through his criminal activity, including real estate, vehicles, and approximately $1.6 million in cash, including $1 million found buried in his parents' backyard. He served his sentence at a federal medical center. In 2025, Albert Gonzalez was released. So what do we take from this story? Albert Gonzalez wasn't an ordinary criminal. He was, by any objective measure, one of the most technically gifted people of his generation. He understood systems, computer systems, legal systems, human psychology, at a level that allowed him to operate invisibly for nearly a decade inside the very institution hunting him. But genius without direction, without ethics, without purpose beyond personal gain, it's ultimately self-destructive. Every layer of deception he built required another layer to maintain it. Every risk he took was slightly larger than the last. The empire he constructed was always going to fall. The only question was when and who would bring it down. The deeper lesson isn't just about cybersecurity, though this story changed how governments and corporations think about digital security forever. It's about what happens when extraordinary ability is pointed in the wrong direction. Albert Gonzalez had everything he needed to be one of the greatest cybersecurity minds in American history. Instead, he chose a different path, and that choice defined everything that followed. This has been the story of Albert Gonzalez, the hacker who fooled the FBI. If you found this story fascinating, drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Was Albert a criminal who happened to be brilliant, or a genius who made the wrong choices? I want to hear your perspective.